computer science is a highly abstract subject. So I like to discuss or teach or talk about computer science in terms of analogies. So suppose, let's take the analogy of a cake. Suppose somebody gives you a cake, right? So you can eat that cake, but you can't bake that cake because you don't know how to do it. So what he has given you is a baked product, analogous to an exe file, a compiled program, which you can run on a laptop, but which you cannot read, which you cannot study. On the other hand, if somebody else gives you the recipe of the cake, and then you can do two things. Number one, you can check every ingredient which is put in the cake. So you can know whether the ingredients are good or whether its ingredients are bad. Similarly, and then you can also modify it. You can maybe, if you are given a plain cake recipe, you can make a vanilla cake, a chocolate cake, or whatever cake, right? So that is the advantage of giving the recipe of the cake. So your open source software is something like the cake recipe, and your closed source system is something like your baked cake. So Python being a totally open source ecosystem, every single line of code which is written in the Python, you can read, you can modify, you can understand, you can experiment. That is why open source movement is there. The open source movement has 4 freedoms. I will just read them out. Freedom 0, 1, 2, 3. The first is the freedom to run the program. The second is to study how the program works and change it so that it does not, and change it. The third is to redistribute it. You can, for example, suppose I write an open source program, I give it to you, then you are free to give it to somebody else and no copyright issues are there. And finally, you can even modify it and redistribute your version also. So that is the 4 freedoms of the open source movement, right? Then there are these various license types in open source software. I'll not go into details, but I feel that any and every person who reads or writes a computer program or uses a computer should know about the licensing issues, the copyright movement, and the copyleft movement. You should know these things because it's quite easy to go wrong. It's quite easy to make a mistake. It is easy to violate the copyright issues. To study about, licenses whenever you're using a piece of software. See, all open source softwares are not good. Some have more liberty, some have less liberty. So it is good if you can do it, but I'll move ahead. Basically, you can divide the open source, softwares into 2 broad categories. The first is anything goes. This means that there are absolutely no restrictions on the license. You can do whatever you want. You can take a open source software, make some modification, and then make it a commercial product and sell it. You can do that. But there is another movement called the copyleft movement, so-called a viral license movement. Here, the theory is that you must give to the others what you get. That means that if you have taken an open source software and then you have modified it, then you cannot close it. Then you must give back to the community or to the system the source code or the modifications which you have made. So these are the 2 basic, variations of the open source software movement. So now, depending upon what are your requirements, you can use either one of the 2 types. I'll skip this and I'll move ahead. Yeah. I believe that you can read some of these, I've put these 5 resources, which I thought are very good in the presentation, and I will be sharing this presentation with all of you. You can have a look. I would specifically like to mention about this, the Cathedral and the Bazaar. If you are really into developing software, you should read this book. And if not the book, at least you can read the Wikipedia page about this book. So basically, this book says is that there are 2 ways in which you can develop a building. The first is the cathedral, the other is the bazaar. Now, cathedral is a very well-planned, predetermined system where you make the plan of the entire cathedral, brick by brick, you make it, and it is very organized. The bazaar, on the other hand, is something where people just start coming, getting together, selling, and if the bazaar picks up, then they start getting organized. So your closed door system is something like a cathedral. For example, Windows, I would call Windows a cathedral, and Linux probably would be a bazaar, where somebody put some small source code on the net, then somebody added something else to it, then something else like that. So this book you can read. And then there's another great book by a person called Richard Stallman, who was the crusader of the free software movement. His book is Free as in Freedom. You can see this is available on the net, and you can read that. Then The differences between free and open source, you can read. This link is there. Yeah, and there is an Indian who has done a great job and developed one of the very popular open source software. His name is Kovid Goel, and he has developed this software called Calibre. If you want to read about his story, how he developed, you can read it. And then finally, this Rebel code. So these are the 5 suggestions I'm giving for this thing. Right? Okay, now coming to Python. So I would not like to start about why Python, but I would like to start with why not Python and who it is probably not for. So I mentioned 5 points: speed, white spaces, mobile apps, runtime errors, and large memory consumption. There might be other issues also, but these are the 5 major issues for which Python is not selected. Speed. Now, Python is an interpreted language. I will talk about compiled versus interpreted language later in the talk, but it's interpreted language, which means that it is by the very nature of its language, it's slower than a language like C++ or Java. Then white spaces. Now, if you have done any programming before, you would know that there's a thing called indentation, where different lines of codes are separated from each other. Python uses white space, whereas languages like C++, things. So it's considered not a very good idea, but it's very visually appealing and very good for the beginners. So white space indentation, if you get used to it, I think is a great idea, but many people think it's not a good idea. Then mobile apps. Python is not native affair to the mobile environment to either iOS or Android. This means that the language Python does not come as part of the iOS operating system or the Android operating system, but languages like Java are native to these environment systems. So it is very easy to develop mobile app in a language like Java, where it's a bit difficult to do it in Python. So if you're looking for mobile app development, then probably you are in the wrong place doing Python. Then runtime errors. So again, this is because it's a scripted language. So runtime errors are there. This is an advanced concept, so I will skip it for the moment. If time permits, I will take it up. Then large memory consumption. So Python is not a good idea where memory is a constraint. Maybe some IoT devices where the memory is very small, then Python probably is not a good idea. But Python is good for what? It is great for web server programming. In fact, there are 2 beautiful frameworks, mind you, not libraries, but frameworks called Django and Flask. So they can be used to create excellent web server side programming. For example, if you have to develop a website, you need so many things. You need to verify the users, you need to have the passwords, you need to display the pages, you may need to connect to a database at the back end, so many things. So if you do all these things from scratch, it is a very painful, difficult, and time-consuming process. But if you use a framework like Django and Flask, you can do it in a matter of minutes. You can actually set up your website, which will do all these things, verifying the users, checking for passwords in a secure manner, connecting to a database, dishing out, videos, pictures, audios on the fly pages, if you use libraries like Django and Flask. Then prototyping, game development, data science, and machine learning. In fact, data science and machine learning are the 2 areas which has made Python so popular amongst university students. In fact, recently I was reading an article that even the MIT, which is one of the top universities of the world, even they are thinking of shifting, or probably they have shifted from Java to Python because it is so good and so easy, right? Okay. Now, if you have heard of a website called Stack Overflow, great. If you have not heard of it, no problem. I'll do a Google on it. Stack Overflow is the programmer's paradise. It is a place where people go and ask questions about issues. And if you don't understand something, if you go and ask them, the chances are that somebody must have already or might have already asked that question before. And so the chances are if you search on Stack Overflow, you'll get an answer. If not, you can put a question and they will answer. So they do a check of the popularity of various languages, and they are saying that even though JavaScript is for 7th year most popular language, but Python is risen in ranks again. So last year it beat out C++, C#. This year it has beaten Java. So Python today is 4th most popular programming language in the world as per this survey. But out of these top 3, HTML is hardly a language and SQL is a language only for databases. So you can say Python is just behind JavaScript. Okay, I'll talk about JavaScript. JavaScript is a, However much you may like Python, you cannot live without JavaScript. It is everywhere because it is a client-side scripting language. It is something which the browsers understand very well. So traditionally, JavaScript was the language which would work in your browser. So whatever you're doing in your browser, the chances are 99.9% JavaScript is working somewhere. And another great thing about JavaScript is that it also has a great ecosystem of libraries. In 2009, a very important and famous library called Node.js was developed. And this allowed JavaScript to work even on the server side. So JavaScript really became very popular. But the problem with JavaScript is many. Number one, it is a bit difficult to learn. Number two, it is a very loosely typed language. Now, I will try to explain the concept of typing if I get the chance. But it is ultimately not the best language if you're doing data science. So it has a niche area. It is good for web servers and web pages, but not much more. So this is a comparison of Python and JavaScript. Easy to learn, Python is easy, JavaScript is harder. Scalability means the ability to take up a lot of load. For example, a Google page, if it can take up 1,000 users or 1,000,000 users, then it would be scalable. So Python is not very scalable. There are reasons for that, technical reasons for that. Node.js is highly scalable. But in web development, it is mostly backend, not front end. Whereas JavaScript is both front end and backend. As I mentioned earlier, because of Node.js, it has become good for backend also. Then other learning areas, machine learning, data analytics, so all these things are there. And speed-wise, Python is slow. Even JavaScript, being an interpreted language, is slow, but it is faster than Python. So these are the comparison. Okay. So I said that what are the new languages on the scene, on the horizon? You see, as computer science progresses, languages are always evolving. There was a time 30 years back when C++ was all rage. Then came Java in around 2000. Then came so many other languages, PHP, Cake PHP. Then you had even Ruby on Rails. So, but these are the 5 languages which I feel are, which might Python in some time in future. Julia, it is started by 2000 by 4 persons in 2009. It is also good for scientific computing. So if you are doing only scientific computing and nothing else, then Julia could be an option to Python. Similarly, Go. Go is also called Golang. It's developed by Google. It is therefore the one problem with Python is that you cannot do good multi-threading in Python. So Go, which is called concurrent programming, means a number of threads running simultaneously. So Go, you can do that, but Python you probably can't. Then Rust. Rust is also, Rust is basically pushed by Microsoft company, and they're trying to push it as an alternative to C and C++. So if your forte is C, but you want to switch to something more modern, but looking like C or C++, then Rust is probably your idea of what you should go for. Swift is, of course, the Apple's thing, but I think Swift is on its way out, and then Kotlin. So these are the 5 languages. I hope we are seeing. Yeah. Okay, I think too much of theory there. I would like to show you, how Python actually works. So I'm just, there are 2 excellent resources. I like to go to this place. Yeah. So I've opened this website. It's called, as you can see, this is called GitHub of interesting Jupyter notebooks, right? So this is a gallery of some very interesting notebooks. Let's see over that. I'll just show you. For example, these are all Python Jupyter notebooks, which you can see. I'll just show you one. This one. Now this Jupyter notebook is, you see, the beauty of a Jupyter notebook is, I'll just open a Jupyter notebook for you. Just let me open this one. Yeah. In fact, I'll just show you this thing, right? Now, Now, see, this Jupyter notebook is an IDE for developing Python programs. You can write Python programs on it. But there's an important difference. The difference is that these are the cells. A cell can be a markdown cell, like here, or it can be a code cell. For example, this is a code cell. So when I click here, it becomes code. right? When I click here, it becomes Markdown. Markdown is a kind of an HTML markup, comparable to markup is. Now let me run this cell, right? Let me run this cell. See, so suppose I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, I want to teach a class. I want to teach them about making a folium heat map from earthquake data, right? So I want to write 5 steps, these 6 steps. So I'm giving these 6 steps. I study the signature of the heat map class, all these things. So what I can do is I can create a cell which is a markdown cell, write all these things in markdown, and then another cell, this is also markdown cell. So step 1 is study the heat. Then I have a code cell. Then again another markdown cell. Then see, this is a code cell. Let me run this code cell. So this is printing the shape of the data frame, which so this will come. Yeah, so it has come. This you can see. You can then, these are the, we can see that the columns of the data frame, the data we have down. See, you must see, notice that this is the location. This location from this is my GitHub page. So I have downloaded this data from this page. See, just in about 7-8 lines of code, I am able to download the data, and then I will just show you the final output, right? And then let me run this. This is the final thing. This will just take a minute. So this is about 20 lines of code, and you can see this is plotting the earthquakes all around the world, and it has created a heat map. So as you know that the Pacific Ring of Fire is there. So all this data, this map, plotting of the map, cleaning of the data, everything has been done in about how much? 20 lines of code. 20, so 6 or 7 lines are being occupied just by function. The point I'm trying to make is that Python is so easy. Python is so friendly. Python is so doable. So if you're not having even if you're a psychology student, a biology student, or a education student, you can learn Python. You can use it in your testing. So let's go back to the presentation, right? Yeah. So I discussed this GitHub Jupyter, this thing. All of you should have a look at it. I think it's a great place to learn Python. Okay. So now I'd like to talk about how to learn Python. So I have divided this entire learning process into 5 steps or 5 tracks, rather 6 tracks, because there's a 2 and a 2B. Let's see track 0. See, track 0 is the basic skills required to learn Python. See, in fact, these are skills not directly connected to Python, but they are kind of things which you need to learn any programming language. So track 0 is learning to use an IDE. IDE is a integrated development environment. I use Jupyter notebooks, but Visual Studio Code is also a free and open source IDE developed by Microsoft. In fact, when I started writing this book about 4 years back, this was not so good, but today VS Code has become very good. So you can use VS Code also, and it is especially useful if you're planning to learn other languages, like, because in VS Code you can do C++, you can do Java, you can do Python, you can do so many languages. So you can do that in Jupyter also, and others. There are other IDEs like PyCharm and all, you can do it. Then you should learn to use GitHub. I feel that anybody who is into computer science in any way, maybe computer science engineering, maybe electrical engineering, maybe physics, maybe chemistry, maybe whatever, any science or even arts, you should be knowing about GitHub. I'll talk about GitHub also. Then you should have some maths knowledge, but this is required only if you're going to machine learning, artificial intelligence, data science. So track 0 relates to those skills which are directly related to Python programming, but help you in the path of learning, right? And then comes to track 1. Yeah, this is the most basic track, basic skills. So basically there are 3 skills, 1, 2, and 3. The first is the Python language specific. The second is the use of some IDE, which is track 0. And third is knowing the basic syntax. Now let's talk about Python language specifics. You should know what is the scripting language, what is the interpreter. You should know what is open source. You should know what is dynamic typing. And you should know about automatic memory management. Now, dynamic typing is a concept which I would like to talk about, and, and use of some IDE you should know. Because if you don't know how to use an IDE, you cannot do any programming. Then you should know basic syntax, keywords, comments, indentations. You should know about operators. You should know about the variables, the literals, the built-in types. So these are all part of your so-called track one. So track one skills are the very basic skills you need to learn Python. Let's go ahead. Then comes track two. Now in track two, we have divided the skills into two parts, essential skills and non-essential skills. Let's first talk about the essential skills. Essential skills, if any programming language has an inbuilt data types. So essential skills in track two would be knowing about these inbuilt data types. You can divide them into two types, sequences and containers. I'll try to explain. Sequences are something, for example, if you have a train with bogies, right? So every bogie is in a sequence. You cannot change that sequence. So it is the sequence. For example, a string. Suppose the word cat. Now cat has C at first place, then A at second place, and T as third place. So the sequence of these three things are important. That's a sequence. A container, on the other hand, could be, suppose you have a bag and you have got a lot of things inside, and you just pull out things. So the order of the things are not important. That's a container. So inbuilt data types in Python are of two types, sequences and containers. Sequences are further of three types, strings, lists, and tuples. So you can discuss these things. And containers are basically sets and dictionaries. For those who are familiar with a little bit of programming, there's a very important concept and there's a very important terminology used in JavaScript called JSON, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. So your Python dictionary is something like a JSON object. So if you are knowing, great. Otherwise, you can look up JSON and Python dictionary on the Google and you will know. Coming to non-essential skills, basically I put three of them: regular expressions, linting, and virtual environment. Regular expressions. So basically, regular expression deals with searching and matching of strings. You see, whenever you are doing any meaningful programming, suppose you want to do any verification, suppose you are asked a user to feed his email ID. Now, we all know, email ID should have that @ sign in it. Suppose you want somebody to give a Gmail ID, then it should have @ and Gmail. So you need a system whereby you can have the user into a particular string. So that is why you need regular expressions. Linting is the process whereby you check about errors in programming. So these are called linters, and in my book I have discussed many linters also. So linting, if it's not an essential skill in the sense that it is not part of the pyramid which is there if you're moving up, but if you know linting, it's great. Then virtual environments. Virtual environment is a great concept in Python. Basically, what it says is that, see, Python uses libraries. Now, libraries may in turn depend on other libraries. For example, you have a library called Seaborn in Python. It is built on a library called Matplotlib. Now, all libraries have versions. So if you load a particular library, but it's not matching with the version on which it is built, there would be errors. That is why the Python developers, they decided that they will create a separate space on your computer for every such individual instance of Python. So you can have Python 2, Python 3, all running on your computer at the same time. I hope this concept is clear. Then comes track 2B. Track 2B basically deals with functions. So you have inbuilt functions imported from libraries. Then you can function syntax writing. Then you have concepts of scope, namespace, lifetime, function arguments. This is a very advanced topic. In my book, I have covered functions in 2 chapters. Default arguments, argument by position, argument using Quark. All these things are there. So if you are, even if you don't know these things, doesn't matter. So if you want to follow my advice, what you can do is you can keep my presentation in front of you when you're reading Python and just try to follow this track, and I'm sure you will do great. Then comes track 3. Now track 3 is basically object-oriented programming and namespaces. You see, Python is an object-oriented programming language, and you have to know OOP. If you don't know OOP, you cannot learn programming. So the first, so I've divided this into 2 parts. First, programming. The second is namespace. Let's first talk about object-oriented programming. So object-oriented programming, you can divide into 2 parts: general op concepts and OOP concepts specific to Python. What I'm trying to say is that there are certain concepts which are common to all object-oriented programming languages. What are they? They are polymorphism, inheritance, operator overloading, static versus dynamic binding. In my opinion, these are the four important OOP concepts which are specific, or which are required in all programming languages. Then there are the OOP concepts specific to Python, right? So these are class methods, init method, function decorators, static methods, all these things. So these are things which are specific to Python. These are the ways in which these things are implemented specifically in Python. So when you are studying object-oriented programming in Python, keep in mind that you need to know the general concepts which are common to all programming languages, and you also need to know specific Python-related concepts. I've tried to cover these things in my book. I mean, you can have a look. Then other is inheritance and namespace. Now, as you all know, inheritance is something in which if you have a class, you can derive another class from it. But in Python, you can do multiple inheritance. That means that you can have one child class coming from 2, 3, 4, 5 parents, right? So that you can do. So you have to know this. Then you have abstract methods. So abstract method is, I'll try to explain the concept. Basically, if you have a class and you have a method in the class which you don't implement in the class, then it's called abstract method. But then somebody would ask, then why to have a method which you are not implementing? The reason is that when you derive your child classes from that abstract base class, then you need to implement those abstract methods in your derived classes. Now, somebody might say, why should you do this? I'll give an example. Suppose you have a class, say animal, okay, and you derive two classes from it, say class cat and class dog. Now you want both cat and dog to have a method called, say, walk. So what you can do? You can do in your animal, which is the parent class, you define a method called walk, but you don't implement it. So now if the programmer who derives the class cat from the class animal will have to by force implement method walk, and the class cat, again derived from class animal, will also have to implement the method walk. That way, the programmer has ensured that his derived classes all implement the same method. That is why you have abstract methods. Then you have, init method in derived classes, then use of super method. So again, if you don't know these things, don't get worried or don't get concerned. Just if you plan, whenever you plan to read Python, if you keep this whole thing in front of you, it might help you to learn things better and faster. Then comes track 4, which talks about exception handling, right, and file operations. Now, as I was telling somebody, exceptions are like the vultures of the animal world, right? So nobody likes vultures because everybody wants, if you see on Discovery, you will see tigers and lions, the ones who kill and eat, but you won't see vultures. So vultures, what are they for? They are good for the dead, the carrion, the something which is wasted. Exactly the same thing exceptions do. So, when you write code, you expect there will be no problems, but there can be a problem, right? If you try to access a file which doesn't exist, there will be a problem. If you try to go to a website when your internet connection is down or the website is down, there will be a problem. Some error will be there. Now you have two options, do nothing or do something. If you do nothing, your program is bound to crash and you will not be able to proceed further. On the other hand, if you want to do something about this, if you anticipate these kind of problems, then you need to have what is called exception handling. In fact, in my book, I have tried to make visual diagrams of all these things. For example, the try except block. I've given a visual diagram, a block diagram of how this works, how try except else block works, how try except else finally block works. Then I also talk about user-defined exceptions. See, in Python, everything is a class. Even an exception is a class. So not only can you use the inbuilt exceptions of Python, you can even derive your own exceptions. You can even define your own exceptions. So these are the things. Then the other part is the file operations. You need to know how to operate on files, how to write to files, how to read to files, how to access files, how to overwrite a file, how to delete a file, how to read file of a particular type, all these things. So this is track 4, coming to track 5. Yeah. This is the fun part, the really beautiful part of Python. I have See, Python can do, the beauty of Python, the fame of Python is because of its library. In fact, Python is a great copier. So, it doesn't just develop its own libraries, but it also copies from others. I'll give an example. When Python was not on the scene, then there were two great softwares which used to be there. First was MATLAB, other is R. Now, MATLAB, basically Python started developing. If you, I mean, since all of your youngsters, you probably wouldn't know, but if you ask the professors, somebody who has done his engineering 30 years back, they would tell you that in our times in engineering colleges, the language was MATLAB for mathematical simulations, for programming and all those things. So what Python did, but problem with MATLAB is that it's a very expensive software. You cannot afford it. So if you are studying in a university, the university might buy a license and you can use it. But if you are a independent researcher like me who doesn't have access to university, then I can't afford MATLAB. I have to go to Python. So what Python did, it copied MATLAB. Similarly, there's another great programming language which now it's, I think, on the decline because of Python. That's called R. So it is a statistician's delight. If you want to do averages, if you want to find means, if you want to find variations, if you want to draw scatter plots, then the language till about 7 or 8 years back used to be R, not Python. What Python did was it picked up the R languages and ported them to Python. Porting in computer science means converting the library from one ecosystem to another ecosystem. So what Python did was it ported those languages to from R to Python. So this track 5 is about libraries. So this green is about data manipulation. The most famous library for that is Pandas. So if you have to learn only one library and no other library, the only library you should learn is Pandas. You must, if you are into data science, you want to read. In fact, in my Jupyter notebook, I showed you about the earthquakes. That also uses Pandas to collect the data from the net. Then, if you are into data visualization, then there are these four. There are many more. I feel that the most important libraries are Matplotlib and Seaborn. Seaborn is basically a wrapper around Matplotlib, and then Plotly. These are the three famous libraries, but there are many more also. You can do a net search, and you can. If you are into internet, if you are collecting, scraping websites, downloading data, then these are the three websites you might libraries which you might use. Requests, Beautiful Soup, and this socket. This is, of course, if you're working at the low level of a socket, which most people don't. But if you're doing that level of programming, you can use sockets. Beautiful Soup is there to make the output from a web page beautiful, because it is all HTML. So if you want to convert the HTML text into plain or XML text into plain data, then you need Beautiful Soup. Then there are mapping libraries like Basemap and Cartopy. If you saw that map, that uses Folium. So in fact, in that earthquake visualization I showed you, it uses Pandas for collecting the data and it uses Folium for visualizing the data. So this is the beauty of Python. You can use all these libraries together. They will all work. They are so seamlessly joined together that you need data, you use Pandas. You need to visualize, you use Folium. You want to get from the net, you use requests. You want to visualize the data, use Plotly, Seaborn, Matplotlib. Okay, and you want to do natural language processing. Another great area of Python is you can use a library called GenSim. I mean, in fact, in my book, the last chapter is on GenSim, chapter number 25. It is available for free on the net. You can just go to the McGraw-Hill website, and you can download this chapter on GenSim and NLTK also. There's a chapter on NLTK also and a chapter on GenSim. So if you are into natural language processing, my 2 chapters are there. It has a lot of example codes. And I think you can learn anything and everything which I wrote, but you don't have 4 years, right? I have my job and on my free time. But if you are on a shortcut, if you're on a quick thing, then have a look at these free chapters even before you have decided to buy my book, right? Then, of course, the area where Python is most famous is machine learning. I put 3 libraries here, but these are the 2 famous ones: PyTorch and TensorFlow. Now, I'll tell you, PyTorch is more on academic research. So if you're in a university, you probably would go for PyTorch. But if you are out in the wild, if like me using it in the commercial side, then you probably go for TensorFlow. Okay, and there are 2 important frameworks, Flask and Django. I hope you know the difference between the library and a framework. A library is something from which you import certain functions, classes, methods, and use them in your program. Framework, on the other hand, is an entire ecosystem which provides you with so many things. What is called in computer science is called boilerplate code. Boilerplate code means that it's like something which is already ready. You just have to put in your particular specific requirements in the code and it gets code. So Flask and Django are the two great frameworks for developing websites. The difference is that Django is very heavyweight. It does everything. And the Flask, on the other hand, is very lightweight. It does very few things. So if you're looking for a very heavy kind of a website where you want everything ready, then you use Django. But if you're using something which is very light, then you can use Flask. So I think I'll move ahead. I'll skip this. The Zen of Python, I would like to discuss this, but okay, I'll just mention it very quickly. Python has a thing called the Zen of Python. This is basically the theory of how Python works. I'll give a few examples. All of them are there, but I'll talk about this. Explicit is better than implicit. This is very important in programming. Whatever you do must be explicit. You see, other is readability counts. Now, the developers of Python, they say one very nice saying. They say code is more often read than written. It makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Suppose I write a library, right? So I write it once and I finish it, and it is read by thousands of people. So the reading of the library is more important than the writing of it. Therefore, I must write it in a manner that each and every person who reads it can easily understand. Errors should never pass silently. If there are expected errors in the code, you should know about them. Not that errors should just go through your code and and create problems. So these are some of the things. Okay, now I'll come to GitHub. This is the GitHub logo, right? And why you should use it. So what is GitHub? So first, there are two things. There's a thing called Git, and there's a thing called GitHub. So Git is an open source version control system that was started by Linus Torvalds, the person who developed Linux. So these words are important. Open source, version control system. Now I'll give an example. You are writing an article, right? And you want many people to write it. So you're writing it, then you give it to your friend, then he makes some corrections, and then you give it another friend. So it creates a huge confusion, because ultimately you are the primary author. You may accept the the changes made by your friend. You may not accept, and then you would like to go back. So what is happening is that there are different versions of the same article existing. Some are with you, some are with your friend. So that is so GitHub is Git is a version control system, right? And GitHub is a code hosting platform for version control and collaboration. The two things are very important. So Git is a system and GitHub is a platform. It's a website. It's owned by a company, but it's free for certain things and paid for certain other things. But it has become the de facto standard for version control and collaboration. What do these terms mean? I'll just explain. And it has a repository. I'll explain repository branching. This diagram has been taken from the GitHub website. Now this is the master branch. Suppose I create some software, and suppose I'm X, and X creates a software and puts it on GitHub. Now you are Y. You want to make some changes. How will you do it? You can't do it because you don't have access to the you don't have the right capability of the file on X's page. You can copy it, but you can't change it. So what you do is you download a version of the software, you make the changes, right? And you make what is called a pull request. Then you send a request to Mr. X saying that I have downloaded your software, I've made certain changes, and I'm sending it to you. Have a look. If you think those are good, incorporate them in your system. So now Mr. X has two options. Number one, he may accept your changes. Number two, he may not. Suppose he thinks that what you did was great, what Y did was great. He will join your changes into his own master branch, and this is called merging. So he merges your changes. So this is how all the softwares, open source softwares in the world are developed. There'll be somebody who owns that software, who's on the master branch. Other collaborators, they will keep on downloading copies of it, making changes and giving pull requests to this master branch. And the master branch will have a look at each of those changes. If he thinks they are good, he will accept them. If he thinks they're not good, he will not accept them. Right? So now, a repository is nothing but a place on GitHub where you keep your software. So forking is now, suppose Mr. X has a software on his website. Now I have two options. I can download it to my computer, or I can fork it to my GitHub page. Just understand the difference. It's there here. Yeah. So suppose this is the software of Mr. X. So I fork it. I create this thing, right? Then I can clone it. If I clone it, then I'm making copy on my local computer. So fork is on the remote side and clone is on my local computer. Then I make changes and I commit it. And then I send the pull request to Mr. X, and Mr. X accepts it. This is how the whole system works. So you have terms like fork, clone, pull, push, pull request, merged. All these terms relate to GitHub. You can read them. You can use it. I think it's a great this thing. So and then there's nothing called GitHub Desktop. This is a recently developed system, because to use Git, basically you need to use the command prompt, right? So many people are not very comfortable with using the command prompt. You don't want to use command prompt, okay, go ahead, but then you can use GitHub Desktop. Okay, now I'll talk a little bit about the basics of Python. So yeah, the features. Now these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 important features. This diagram has been taken from my book. So Python is an interpreted language as opposed to compiled language. Let's see this. So these are this is a interpreted language and this is a compiled language. Let's see the difference. In an interpreted language, you write the source code, the interpreter interprets it, and output is there, right? But in a compiled language, the source code first goes through a process called a compiler. The compiler compiles this source code into, if you are into C, then you would create, suppose you have a file, say program.c, then it will create another intermediate file that creates the object code. Now this in turn will be used by the executor to create the output. So there are two stages, from source code to object code, and then from object code to the final output. Now there are certain advantages and disadvantages of the system of a compiled. Let's talk about the advantages of a compiled system. The first is that there are two times. The first time is from the source code to the object code, and second time is from the object code to the output. So suppose I have created a file, or I have created a library, and I compile it. So now I can take out the source code. I just need this object code, and this I can share with the people, and they can run it. So this will run faster because the compile time is already done. So since I'm giving you the compiled part of the code, so I don't need to compile. The person who is taking it doesn't need to compile it. He simply needs to run it. So that is why compiled languages run faster than the interpreted language. The other advantage is that, as I said about the cake, the object code is not in a human readable form. So if you want to protect your source code, if you think that there are some copyright issues, if you think that your rival might copy your project and create the same application which you have done, you don't want to share for your source code for whatever reasons, then probably it's better to compile it and give it in a compiled form. On the other hand, interpreted languages, they don't have any compiler. So source code is directly interpreted and output. That is why every error in a Python program will come only when you're executing it, because there is no compiler. So here there's a additional step of error checking in compiled languages, which is not there in Python. This is a disadvantage of using Python, right? I hope this is clear. Let's come back. So interpreter is there. Free and open source, I have told you. Portable is obvious. Portable means that it can be run on Windows, it can be run on Linux, it can be run on iOS. Then there's a thing of dynamic typing. I'll just talk about this. And there's a thing of automatic memory management. These two topics I'll just talk about. Okay. Portable, I've already explained. Dynamic, yeah. Let's take the example, or let's take the analogy of a box and a tag. As you all know that when you create an object in any programming language, then what you're doing, you are reserving a certain amount of memory for that object, and then you use a variable name to refer to that object. Suppose you you have a class, say cat, and you create a particular cat, say Garfield. Garfield is a cat. So your object is Garfield. It exists in the memory. Its name is Garfield, right? What you have done? So you have done two things. You have created some memory in space, in some space in the some area you have reserved in the memory, and you have given it a name. Now, the amount of memory you require will depend upon the kind of object you are saving. So there are two things: the name of the object and the space in the memory. In languages like C++, the name and the space, they must be of the same type. So if you think of the analogy of a box, so in C++, a memory name is like a box. You may have a box, for example, you have a box for shoes, you may have a box for matchstick. You have a matchbox and a shoebox. So in C++, you cannot use the matchbox to store shoes, obviously. But in Python, the name is not a box, it is like a tag. It's like a tag, price tag. So that same price tag can be put onto a shoe. It can also be put onto a matchbox. So that is dynamic typing or dynamic binding. That means that any tag of any type can hold any object, which is not in C++. This is an advantage and also a disadvantage. I hope the concept is clear. It is given in my book. You can have a look. Then automatic memory management. This is to do with something called garbage collection. If you don't know the concept, I think I'll skip it. But garbage collection, I'll just mention it. Garbage collection basically deals with creating and destroying objects. When you create objects, you're reserving memory space in the memory. Now, once those objects are no more required, then somebody needs to destroy that object so that that memory can be reused. For that, you have what is called a garbage collector. Okay, then, Then I would like to talk about why you should use Jupyter Notebooks in Anaconda distribution. I think that Jupyter Notebook is the way of the future, and this is especially true for all professors, all teachers, all educators. I especially recommend to all of you, have a look at Jupyter Notebooks. It can be used for all kinds of things, whether you're teaching mathematics, you can write equations, differential equations, I will show you. You can write, anything, you can have maps, I'll just show you all those things. Then the philosophy behind Jupyter Notebook is rather technical. This is called literate computing versus literate programming. So literate computing was a concept given by Donald Knuth. You know that he's basically it says that the document intended for human consumption. No, you can read it. I'll skip this because the time is less. The link is there if you want to read the article on Jupyter, the Fernando Perez, the person who designed Jupyter Notebook. It's a very interesting article written by him. The link is here. You can have a look at it if you want. And the traditional way to learn Python was use the idle Python interpreter, but I feel that you should not be on idle. You should be on Jupyter Notebook. That's my. And why you need Jupyter Notebook? Everything together. You can have the description in Markdown cells, the code, the output. You can run your code in parts. Suppose you have a program which has 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can write the first block, second block, third block, fourth block. Then support, and Jupyter supports over 40 programming languages, including Python, R, Julia, Scala. Easy install, interactive output. You can share the notebooks, and then big data integration. So these are the things. And Anaconda is a package. This thing, it has more than 200 libraries for scientific computing. So you can use it, and it has a lot of extensions. These are some of the. You can extend the functionality of a Jupyter Notebook through all. You can do cell filters, code filtering, numbering, auto numbering exercises. So many things. In fact, you go crazy seeing the kind of things you can do with the extensions. Then you can client server app. In fact, you can even create a Jupyter Notebook server on a remote machine. So if you're in a university or a college, you can host your website, your Jupyter Notebooks on a server also. So, disclaimer: this is not about purchasing a book, as I mentioned, but have a look at my book because I think I put a lot of labor. So by and large, I'm done. I can just show you some of the other. I just show you this slide. Have a look at this now. See, I'll run this. For example, look at this. This is the Lorentz equations, right? Suppose I'm a teacher, I want to teach Lorentz equations to a class. I can have this notebook, Jupyter notebook, and I'll just run this cell. See beautiful equations come. Then suppose we have another one, Cauchy-Schwarz inequalities. They are coming, right? So the cross of vectors, we can do it, right? Then even images. Now this is the image of the Tower of Hanoi. I have this script also. If you want to see, I can show you. Now I want to display this Tower of Hanoi, but from this website, right? And let's see how it happens. Yeah. So you can see that the images. This image is coming from the Britannica website. So this is in a Jupyter notebook. So if I want to teach my students about the Tower of Hanoi problem, I can have this image. So that will give the students an insight into how this whole thing works. Then suppose I want to embed I have done this. A YouTube video is embedded here. Just see this. This will take a minute because downloading from the net. Yeah. This, yeah.
Sure. Thanks, sir. While you're showing that, we also see there are some questions from the audience. So I'll just request Prakriti to read out the questions to you so that then we can take the questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello. So are you able to hear us? We have a few questions in from our students as well as the other attendees. Okay. So one of them was from Amar Singh. How can we install Panda in PyCharm?
You see, there are two ways of doing it. One is called pip, other is called conda. If you are into ecosystem other than Jupyter notebooks, then you can do it through pip. On the if you go to the command prompt and you just type pip and the name of the library, it should download and install. And if you are on Jupyter, then you can use Conda. So pip and Conda, just remember these two words and do a Google search. And there are thousands and thousands of websites giving detailed instructions of how to download and install Python libraries. Just remember these two words, pip and Conda.
Great, sir. Yeah. We have one more. Kindly tell some libraries for image processing in computer vision.
Yeah, there is a library in C++. I'm just forgetting its name. I think it's called OpenCV. OpenCV is a library for image processing. It has a lot of algorithms. For example, algorithms for edge detection. Suppose you have an image which has an edge. So you can use OpenCV. It's a C++ library, but it has been ported into Python. So you can use OpenCV. There are many other libraries also, but OpenCV is one of the most popular and famous ones. OpenCV, yeah.
Great, sir. So one of them is, what are the optimization techniques used in Python?
Optimization in running of the code. I am not very sure. I am not very sure about the answer, but I remember reading somewhere. I have not done it myself, that you can also compile Python code and run it as an exe file. That is possible. So if you are having a script, you want to compile it, and that is one way. There must be other ways also. I'm not aware. Sorry, I can't answer that question.
No problem. So we'll take that question again if it comes again. One of them is why Linux uses Python majorly.
Yes.
That is the question. Why does Linux use Python majorly?
Why does Linux use Python natively?
Linux use Python.
Yeah, that is because both Linux and Python are open source softwares. So the open source people love open source, and for example, now I might not be liked for this, but why would Oracle buy a company like Java? Why would Oracle buy MySQL? So it's about licensing and those things. Linux is open source and Python is open source. So I think Linux, that could be the reason. I am not aware.
Okay, so one of the students says that, can you suggest how we create a Python code for data comparisons between different parameters?
Data comparison between different parameters. Data. I'm not. The question is not clear to me. Can you ask the student to elaborate?
Okay,
And
so
in the
we'll
meantime, you
ask.
can come up with the next question.
Sure,
Yeah.
sir. We'll ask
You
Mr.
can-
Abhishek
you can
Gulati to
mail-
please elaborate the question again. Okay.
Yeah, otherwise, you can mail it to me. You can share my email ID with him and he can mail it to me. I will certainly try to give him a good answer.
Great, sir. We can certainly request him to share this with you. Okay, so what is
Yeah.
pickling and unpickling?
Yeah, pickling is, okay. Pickling is basically, in fact, it's a great question. Great question. Something I missed in my talk. When you create an object and you need to save it, then you have to, what is called flattening the object. You have to create a stream out of the object. That is called pickling. So whenever you're trying to save some complex object into your memory, then the process of flattening the object is called pickling. And when you're reading an object, now mind you, not simple data, but an object from the memory into your Python code, then you're doing the reverse, which is called unpickling. And by the way, an alternative to pickling is now JSON. So these days, many languages, instead of pickling and unpickling, are creating a JSON equivalent of an object, saving it in JSON format. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, sir. So there's one more. Can we use nature-inspired algorithms in Python for optimization?
I'm sorry, I missed out. Can you come again, please?
Can we use nature-inspired algorithms in Python for optimization?
Nature inspired. See, I am not much into machine learning for optimization, but the most common algorithm is what is called gradient descent. And Python is at least 8 different libraries which are implementing gradient descent. You can do it in scikit-learn, you can do it in PyTorch, you can do it in TensorFlow, you can even do it in NumPy. So I hope that answers your question. Gradient descent is one optimization technique. There must be others. I'm not very good in that area. Sorry, I can't answer that.
Okay, sir. So we'll take one last question before you end the session. This is from Mridul Shukla. This says, how do you see Python's future in government sector like public sector undertakings and administration management?
That's a very difficult question to answer because ultimately public sector follows the private sector. Because you see, I am not aware of any great software developed by a public sector firm. Most of the softwares around the world are developed by private initiatives. So I think that the leaders in software development is not the public sector. The leaders are always the private sector. But having said that, I think that there's a great realization amongst many governments around the world and even in India that open source is the way of future. So Python being an open source is a great language, and I think it's a great future. So if you're investing time and money into Python, I think it's money well spent, time well spent, and you probably should get good return.